into a tale of secrets, betrayal, and a shocking love affair that ended in murder. Kyle Ellerbee was an 18-year-old high school senior from Carbondale, Illinois, known for his bright future both on and off the football field. As the star quarterback of Carbondale Community High School's football team, Kyle was admired by his classmates and respected by his coaches. His athletic talent had earned him the nickname Golden Boy among his peers, and he was often featured in local sports reports. He had dreams of playing college football, and several universities had shown interest in recruiting him. Kyle lived with his parents, Richard Ralph Ellerbee, 48, and Cindy Ellerbee, 45, in a comfortable suburban home. Ralph, a sales manager, was a former athlete himself, having once been a promising football player before a knee injury ended his sports career. He poured his unfulfilled ambitions into Kyle, pushing him to excel in football. Cindy, once vibrant and full of life, had become increasingly withdrawn, battling alcoholism and feelings of inadequacy. The pressure of maintaining appearances weighed heavily on the family, particularly on Kyle, who felt the burden of living up to his father's high expectations. Despite his confident exterior, Kyle was a deeply sensitive young man. He struggled with his sexual identity, a secret he kept hidden from everyone, including his closest friends. The only person who knew the truth was his football coach, Robert J. McMurdo, with whom Kyle had developed a secret sexual relationship. The relationship was a source of both comfort and stress for Kyle, who feared the consequences if their affair were ever discovered. In the days leading up to his death, Kyle was focused on his future. He was preparing for final exams and looking forward to graduation. He spent hours practicing on the football field, determined to secure a college scholarship. However, the stress of maintaining his secret life took its toll. Friends noticed he seemed distracted and more withdrawn than usual. His normally bright smile was replaced by a look of worry. At home, tensions were high, with his mother's drinking spiraling out of control and his father's demands growing more intense. Kyle's last days were a mix of hope and fear as he balanced his dreams of a bright future with the shocking secrets that would ultimately lead to his tragic end. On the morning of May 12, 2014, at around 7:30 a.m., Ralph Ellerbee walked downstairs into the basement of his family's home in Carbondale, Illinois, expecting to find his son Kyle getting ready for school. Instead, Ralph stumbled upon a scene that would haunt him forever. Kyle's lifeless body was sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, surrounded by sports equipment and memorabilia, including the football trophies he had won over the years. The basement, usually a place of pride for the Ellerbee family, had become the site of a tragic discovery. Ralph's first reaction was shock. He stood frozen for a moment, unable to process what he was seeing. The 48-year-old sales manager, who had always been so proud of his son's accomplishments, now felt a wave of panic and disbelief wash over him. He rushed to Kyle's side, desperately checking for signs of life, but it was clear that his son was gone. The boy who had been the center of his world, the one he had pushed so hard to succeed, was now lying dead at his feet. After a few moments, Ralph managed to gather himself enough to call 911. His voice was shaky and hoarse as he reported what he had found. "My son, he's not breathing," he stammered. The 911 operator tried to keep him calm, asking for details, but Ralph could barely focus on the questions. All he could think about was Kyle and the horrible realization that his son would never fulfill the dreams they had both worked so hard for. When the paramedics arrived a few minutes later, they confirmed what Ralph had already known deep down. Kyle was dead. The scene was eerily quiet, with only the sound of Ralph's heavy breathing and the distant hum of a television in the living room, which had been left on. Cindy Ellerbee, Kyle's mother, drunk and still asleep upstairs, was unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded. It wasn't until Ralph's anguished cries echoed through the house that she awoke, disoriented, and still groggy from the night before. When she finally realized what had happened, her screams pierced the quiet morning, adding to the grief that was now overwhelming the Ellerbee household. The Carbondale police arrived at the Ellerbee residence around 8 o'clock a.m. on May 12, 2014, just minutes after Ralph's frantic 911 call. Leading the investigation was Detective Sally O'Malley, a seasoned officer known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense approach. O'Malley, 42, had been with the Carbondale Police Department for over 15 years and had handled her fair share of tough cases, but the death of a popular high school quarterback like Kyle Ellerbee was sure to be one of the most challenging. When O'Malley and her team entered the basement, they found a scene that didn't quite add up. Kyle's body lay at the foot of the stairs, with a large football trophy nearby. The room was cluttered with sports equipment, Helmets, jerseys, and footballs were scattered around, but there was something about the positioning of the body and the items around it that caught O'Malley's attention. The detective noted that while Kyle's head injury appeared consistent with the fall, a lack of blood and the angle of his body suggested something more sinister. The basement was dimly lit, with only a few small windows allowing in the morning light. The walls were adorned with posters of NFL stars like Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, and the shelves were lined with trophies, highlighting Kyle's impressive athletic achievements. O'Malley carefully examined the scene, noting the absence of any clear signs of struggle, but her experience told her that what seemed like an accident could easily be a staged crime. As the forensics team began their work, taking photos and collecting evidence, O'Malley focused on the heavy football trophy that was lying next to Kyle. It was large enough to inflict a fatal blow, and there were faint smudges on it that looked like fingerprints. The detective ordered it to be bagged as evidence, suspecting it could be the murder weapon. The rest of the house was searched as well. The living room still had the TV on, playing Good Morning America on ABC, while Cindy Ellerbee sat on the couch in shock, a half-empty bottle of vodka on the coffee table in front of her. Ralph, who had made the initial discovery, was pacing the floor, visibly distraught but cooperating with the officers. Detective O'Malley's instincts told her this wasn't just a tragic accident. The eeriness of the scene, combined with the odd details, hinted at something far more complex. As the investigation unfolded, it would soon become clear that Kyle Ellerbee's death was not what it appeared to be. The first person Detective O'Malley turned her attention to was Coach Robert J. McMurdo, the 46-year-old football coach at Carbondale Community High School. Coach McMurdo was well known in the community, not just for leading the football team to numerous victories, but also for his charismatic and authoritative presence. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, someone who could bring out the best in his players. Underneath his confident exterior, however, O'Malley suspected there might be more to the coach than met the eye. At the police station, McMurdo was cooperative but clearly nervous. He sat across from Detective O'Malley in a small, dimly lit interrogation room. The walls were bare, and the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. O'Malley began the interview by asking McMurdo about his relationship with Kyle. The coach spoke fondly of the young man, describing him as one of the most talented and dedicated players he had ever coached. With that body of his, Kyle had a natural gift, McMurdo said, his voice trembling slightly. He could read the field like no one else. I had big plans for him. But when O'Malley pressed further, asking if their relationship extended beyond the football field, McMurdo hesitated. His discomfort was palpable as he struggled to maintain his composure. He admitted he cared about Kyle, but only as a coach cares for any of his players. O'Malley wasn't convinced. She could see the guilt in his eyes, the fear of something being exposed. She then asked directly about any sexual relationship between him and Kyle, a question that made McMurdo visibly tense. His denial was immediate, but there was a quiver in his voice that O'Malley couldn't ignore. The detective then shifted the conversation to the morning of Kyle's death, asking McMurdo about his whereabouts and whether he had any contact with Kyle that day. The coach insisted he was at home preparing for practice and hadn't spoken to Kyle since the previous day. However, when O'Malley presented him with a record of sexually explicit text messages and naked pictures sent between him and Kyle, sent late the night before, McMurdo's calm demeanor began to crack. McMurdo's face went pale as he realized the evidence against him was mounting. He had a body like Adonis, he exclaimed. Robert told police he was conflicted by his romantic relationship with Kyle, which turned sexual after watching Kyle shower after a practice. He said he genuinely loved the young man, but he knew the consequences if their affair were ever discovered. Throughout the interrogation, McMurdo maintained his innocence, but his nervousness only grew. He repeatedly wiped his forehead with a handkerchief, his hands shaking slightly. Despite his efforts to appear in control, it was clear that the pressure was getting to him. O'Malley knew she had rattled him, but she also knew that without a confession or more concrete evidence, she couldn't arrest him just yet. The interrogation ended with McMurdo being released, but not before O'Malley made it clear that he was now a prime suspect in the investigation. Next, Detective Sally O'Malley turned her attention to Richard Ralph Ellerbee, Kyle's 48-year-old father. Ralph was a sales manager at a local auto dealership and a well-known figure in Carbondale. He had a reputation as a proud, ambitious man who lived vicariously through his son's accomplishments. Once a star high school athlete himself, Ralph's football career was cut short by a knee injury. He had channeled all his unfulfilled dreams into Kyle, pushing him to excel on the football field. On the morning of Kyle's death, Ralph's reaction was intense. He was visibly distressed and kept asking the officers what had happened to his son. According to witnesses, he seemed more agitated than heartbroken. His concern focused on how this tragedy might affect Kyle's legacy and the family's reputation. During his interview with O'Malley, Ralph was cooperative but defensive. He spoke proudly of Kyle's achievements, emphasizing how much he had invested in his son's future. Kyle was destined for greatness, Ralph said, his voice thick with emotion. He was going to go all the way to the NFL, and I was going to make sure of it. But as the conversation shifted to Kyle's personal life, Ralph's tone changed. He became evasive, particularly when O'Malley asked about Kyle's relationship with Coach McMurdo. O'Malley had already discovered that Ralph's and McMurdo's relationship was sexual. Ralph often attended practices, games, and even team meetings where he and the coach would discuss Kyle's progress and future. When asked if he knew about Kyle's sexual involvement with McMurdo, Ralph hesitated. He eventually admitted that he had heard rumors, but insisted he didn't believe them. However, O'Malley wasn't entirely convinced. She had evidence suggesting that Ralph knew more than he was letting on. Text messages between Ralph and McMurdo, found on Ralph's phone, vividly showed that he was aware of the relationship between his son and the coach, even planning dates for him and offering to be a lookout. In one exchange, Ralph even congratulated the coach, telling him that his sex with Kyle must have been behind his 3 touchdowns during a previous game. Despite Ralph's efforts to appear calm and collected, O'Malley noticed cracks in his composure. His voice would occasionally waver, and he seemed unusually anxious when discussing certain topics. The detective suspected that Ralph's deep-seated homophobia and fear of scandal had created a volatile mix of emotions that he was struggling to keep under control. As the interview concluded, O'Malley couldn't shake the feeling that Ralph was hiding something. His refusal to fully acknowledge the possibility of his son's involvement with Coach McMurdo, coupled with his obvious discomfort, made him a person of interest in the ongoing investigation. The final suspect on Detective Sally O'Malley's list was Cindy Ellerbee, Kyle's 45-year-old mother. Cindy had once been a vibrant woman, a formed teen beauty queen with a lively personality. But by May of 2014, she had become a shadow of her former self, struggling with alcoholism and deep-seated feelings of sexual inadequacy. Her marriage to Ralph had grown strained and loveless, and she often felt overlooked in her own home, especially as Ralph focused all his attention on Kyle's football career. Cindy's descent into alcohol abuse had become well known in the community. Neighbors frequently saw her at the local liquor store, often buying bottles of cheap vodka. Her drinking had escalated to the point where she was rarely sober, leading to erratic behavior that further isolated her from friends and family. Cindy's relationship with Kyle had also deteriorated. She resented the pressure placed on him by Ralph and was deeply jealous of the close bond between Kyle and his father. On the morning of Kyle's death, Cindy had been at home. When the police arrived, they found her in a state of hysteria, alternating between sobbing uncontrollably and shouting incoherently. Her disheveled appearance and the smell of alcohol on her breath raised immediate concerns among the officers on the scene. During her interview with Detective O'Malley, Cindy was unstable and emotional. She fluctuated between anger and sadness, her responses often incoherent. O'Malley asked about Cindy's relationship with Kyle, and Cindy's answers were evasive. "Kyle was my baby," she said repeatedly, but when pressed for details about their interactions in the days leading up to his death, she struggled to provide clear answers. O'Malley also inquired about Cindy's relationship with Coach McMurdo. Cindy's reaction was telling. Her face twisted in anger, and she accused her son of taking away Coach McMurdo from her. "Kyle had the mind of a hussy and the body of Tom Brady," she spat out, her words dripping with bitterness. "Why did he have to take my man?" As the interview progressed, Cindy became increasingly agitated, especially when O'Malley suggested that Kyle's death might not have been an accident. Cindy's mood swings and erratic behavior made it difficult to get a coherent narrative from her. However, O'Malley noted that Cindy's anger toward McMurdo and her jealousy of Kyle's relationship with his father seemed to be driving her emotional outbursts. Despite her unstable demeanor, Cindy remained a person of interest. O'Malley couldn't ignore the possibility that Cindy's deep-seated resentments and her deteriorating mental state might have played a role in Kyle's death. The detective left the interview with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Cindy Ellerbee's troubled past and volatile emotions made her a key figure in this tragic case. Hey, true crime case solvers interested in more real-life murder mysteries, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Stay safe, true crime case solvers. On May 18, 2014, just a week after Kyle Ellerbee's tragic death, a startling new development shook the town of Carbondale. It happened during Kyle's memorial service, held at the local high school gymnasium, where hundreds of mourners gathered to pay their respects. The atmosphere was heavy with grief, but it was Ralph Ellerbee's unexpected outburst that left everyone in shock. Ralph, visibly intoxicated and overcome with emotion, stood up in the middle of the service. His words were slurred, but the message was clear. He confessed to knowing that his wife, Cindy Ellerbee, had killed their son. Ralph revealed that he had helped Cindy stage the scene to look like an accident in a desperate attempt to protect their family from scandal. The crowd was stunned into silence, unable to process the magnitude of his admission. Detective Sally O'Malley, who had been attending the service to observe the family's behavior, immediately knew the investigation had just taken a critical turn. After Ralph's confession, the Carbondale Police Department quickly responded, taking Ralph into custody for further questioning. The police returned to the Ellerbee household, this time with a clearer understanding of what they were looking for. Inside the home, they revisited the basement where Kyle's body had been found. With Ralph's confession in mind, the officers searched for any evidence that could corroborate his story. They discovered traces of blood that had been poorly cleaned, as well as additional fragments of the shattered trophy that had been missed during the initial investigation. Forensic experts re-examined the evidence, confirming that the blood found at the scene matched Kyle's DNA. Ralph's confession, combined with the physical evidence, painted a grim picture of the events leading up to Kyle's death. It was now evident that Cindy had struck Kyle with the trophy in a fit of rage, and that Ralph had assisted her in covering up the crime. The community was left reeling from Ralph's shocking revelation. What had once been seen as a tragic accident was now understood to be a brutal murder, meticulously concealed by the very people who should have protected Kyle the most. This new evidence and Ralph's confession brought the investigation to a critical juncture, setting the stage for a shocking arrest. Following Ralph Ellerbee's shocking confession at his son Kyle's memorial service, the Carbondale Police Department wasted no time in moving forward with the investigation. On May 20, 2014, just 48 hours after Ralph's admission, the police officially identified Cindy Ellerbee as the prime suspect in Kyle's murder. Cindy, a 45-year-old homemaker struggling with alcoholism, had long been a troubled figure in the community. Her erratic behavior and strained relationship with Kyle had not gone unnoticed by neighbors and friends, but the truth of her involvement in his death was still a bitter pill for many to swallow. Detective Sally O'Malley led the charge to bring Cindy into custody. The team assembled at the Ellerbee household early that morning. The atmosphere was tense, with overcast skies matching the somber mood of the officers. When they arrived at the door, Cindy answered, looking disheveled and weary, as if she had aged years in the days since the memorial. Without much resistance, Cindy was placed under arrest. The weight of the moment seemed to hit her all at once, and she broke down in tears, not out of surprise, but out of resignation. She knew that the truth had finally caught up with her. As Cindy was escorted to the police car, the neighborhood was eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of morning traffic breaking the silence. Inside the station, she was formally charged with the murder of her son, Kyle Ellerbee. During her initial interrogation, Cindy was emotional but cooperative, providing a detailed account of the events leading up to the murder. She admitted that on the night of Kyle's death, she had been drinking heavily. An argument with Kyle had escalated, fueled by her smoldering jealousy over his sexual relationship with Coach Murdo. In a blind rage, she grabbed one of Kyle's football trophies and struck him with it, killing him instantly. Cindy explained how Ralph, upon discovering what she had done, decided to help her stage the scene as an accident. Together, they dragged Kyle's body to the bottom of the basement stairs and scattered sports equipment around to make it appear as though he had fallen. Ralph had hoped that this would keep their family's dark secret hidden, but his conscience ultimately betrayed him. The arrest of Cindy Ellerbee sent shockwaves through the community. For the Ellerbee family, once admired for their success and unity, the reality of their downfall was now laid bare. The reactions of those close to Kyle were a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. They struggled to comprehend how a mother could commit such a heinous act against her own child. Cindy Ellerbee's trial for the murder of her son, Kyle Ellerbee, began in late August 2014 at the Jackson County Courthouse in Carbondale, Illinois. The case quickly became the talk of the town, with local media outlets like the Southern Illinoisan covering every detail. The courtroom was packed with spectators, many of whom had known the Ellerbee family for years and were eager to see justice served. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Mark Armthorpe, a seasoned 50-year-old attorney known for his tough stance on violent crimes, argued that Cindy's actions were premeditated. He painted a picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and anger, unable to cope with her son's relationship with Coach Robert J. Murdo. Armthorpe emphasized the brutality of the crime, noting that Cindy had not only killed her son but had also gone to great lengths to cover up the murder with the help of her husband, Ralph. The prosecution's case was bolstered by forensic evidence and Ralph's confession, both of which left little room for doubt. On the defense side, attorney Linda Caldwell Blankenship, a 45-year-old public defender with a reputation for taking on difficult cases, argued that Cindy's actions were not premeditated but rather the result of a momentary lapse in judgment fueled by alcohol and emotional distress. Caldwell Blankenship sought to portray Cindy as a victim of her circumstances, a woman struggling with addiction and mental health issues, overwhelmed by the pressures of her life. She pleaded for leniency, arguing that Cindy's actions were not those of a cold-blooded killer, but of a deeply troubled individual who needed help, not harsh punishment. Throughout the trial, Kyle's friends and teammates attended in support of the Ellerbee family, their faces reflecting the pain and confusion of losing a beloved friend under such tragic circumstances. The jury deliberated for just 2 days before returning with a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Cindy Ellerbee was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought some measure of closure to Kyle's friends and family, but the impact of the trial was profound. Cindy's sentencing left the community divided. Some felt that justice had been served, while others believed the punishment was too harsh for a woman who had clearly been struggling with her own demons. For Ralph Ellerbee, the trial marked the final unraveling of his family, leaving him to face the consequences of his own complicity in Kyle's death. In the aftermath of Cindy Ellerbee's trial, life in Carbondale, Illinois, would never be the same for those involved. Cindy, now serving a 25-year sentence at Logan Correctional Center, had little contact with the outside world. Her time in prison was marked by isolation and regret as she grappled with the consequences of her actions. The once vibrant woman who had been a familiar face at high school football games was now a shadow of her former self, lost in the routine of prison life. Ralph Ellerbee, Kyle's father, was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. He sold the family home, unable to bear living in the place where his son had died. Ralph moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of town, where he continued to struggle with his guilt. He had lost not only his son and wife, but also the respect of the community. Ralph, who had once been a prominent figure in Carbondale, found himself alienated and alone, with only his memories for company. His battle with alcohol worsened, and he rarely left his apartment, becoming a recluse. Coach Robert J. Murdo, who had been at the center of the scandal, resigned from his position at the high school. The revelation of his relationship with Kyle Ellerbee had destroyed his career. Despite never being charged with a crime, the damage to his reputation was irreversible. McMurdo moved out of state, trying to rebuild his life in anonymity. However, the stigma followed him, and he found it difficult to escape the shadows